What's happening, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about an X-Men book. This is X-Men Golgotha. This collects Adjectiveless X-Men issues 166 through 170, and this is the beginning of the Peter Milligan run on Adjectiveless X-Men. And back when I was reviewing Chuck Austin's run on Uncanny X-Men, I kept saying that run is not the worst X-Men run in history, and that Peter Milligan's run is actually worse. And I was kind of surprised after reading this volume that there's a few similarities between Peter Milligan's run and Chuck Austin's run. Number one, he is working with the team that Chuck Austin left off with. As you may know, Chuck Austin, he wrote Uncanny X-Men for a little while, and then all of the creative teams were kind of shuffled around. And he went from Uncanny X-Men back to New X-Men, and then after 2 issues, that title was changed back to Adjectiveless X-Men, and then he wrote for another, I think, 8 issues, and then he left that book. And so Peter Milligan is working with the same team that Chuck Austin had when he left. Of course, Juggernaut is no longer in the book, Annie is no longer in the book, but other than that, the characters that Austin was using in his final 8 issues on X-Men, those are the characters that Milligan is using here. And also, Milligan's run starts off not horrible, but it does get worse over time, in the same way that Chuck Austin's run, if you go and read the first volume of Austin's run, Hope, it's not that bad. It's actually a pretty decent story. It gets really awful later on in the run, but it starts off okay. And that's the same with Milligan's run. And I'm going to go ahead and say, and I'll probably be saying this every time I review a Milligan story, but Milligan's run, the big problem I had with it was that he put way too much focus on character conflicts, frustrations between the characters, interpersonal conflicts between the characters on the team. And that is certainly a part of any team story. You're going to have a pretty boring story about characters if they all get along with each other and there's never any conflicts between each other. So I understand putting conflicts between characters in a team book like this, but I feel like Milligan, and this is almost another similarity between Milligan and Austin, I feel like he put way too much emphasis on the character conflicts. Now, I think that Milligan was actually worse about this than Austin was. I think Austin, he would have a lot of really terrible character conflicts. He would have characters who mostly just care about having sex with each other and who's sleeping with who. That was mostly what all the conflict was about there, and that's a large percentage of what it's about here, but I feel like the stories almost came second nature in Milligan's run. While at least in Austin's run, you have a band of wolf mutants who are killing human beings because they think that they're inferior to mutants. That's a pretty weak story. There's not a whole lot of substance there, but at least there is a story. In Milligan's run, I remember very little of the stories in the run. I mostly just remember the characters arguing with each other. That's largely what I remember from Milligan's run. But in this volume, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of characters arguing with each other, but it feels warranted because the main villain of this story is this psychic bug creature that has lived on Earth for thousands of years and has somehow been unearthed now. It's not explained how it's been unearthed, but it is. This creature is called Golgotha, hence the name of the story. And at one point in the story, it's even hinted that this creature was there in Jerusalem around the time when Jesus Christ was crucified, and that maybe this creature was kind of influencing the behavior of the crowds that were crucifying Jesus. And the whole thing that this creature does is that it gets in your head and it pulls out your deepest, darkest thoughts and it inflates those and makes them bigger. And so you've got all these characters in this team and they have all these things that they want to say to each other, but they don't. They're keeping it under control. And then when they're near the Golgotha creature, suddenly they're having these outbursts that are very out of character. So I would say that in this book, it's at least forgivable that all these characters are having these really petty, childish arguments with each other because the Golgotha creature is causing those arguments to happen. The problem is, this continues throughout the entire run, where characters will act very petty and childish with each other, and in every other storyline in this series, there is no excuse, because there is no Golgotha creature kind of fueling those flames. In this story, you have Gambit and Rogue. They kind of argue about they can't really have a sustainable relationship because Rogue can't touch Gambit. You have Iceman, Havoc, and Polaris. They're all three sort of stuck in this stalemate where Havoc has feelings for Polaris, even though he left her at the altar not too long ago in towards the end of Austin's run on Uncanny X-Men, and now he's back to having feelings for her. She maybe has feelings for Iceman, or maybe she's just kind of gravitating towards him because she's still a little upset with Havoc. Maybe she's doing this to make Havoc jealous. Who knows? And then you've also got Wolverine in this book, and the big thing that the Golgotha creature is kind of fueling in him is that he's an old man hanging out with a whole bunch of kids, and he's kind of the odd man out, and he's just hanging out with them, hoping that some of their youth and exuberance will rub off on him. And then Emma Frost is in this story, and I don't think that Emma Frost was actually in the rest of this run. She's just here, probably because they needed a telepath on this team for this particular story. But I don't believe that she was part of this run throughout the rest of this run. And she's kind of, her thing is that she feels like she's getting old and ugly, and so she gets really mad at Havoc because she thinks that Havoc is Cyclops at one point, and she's yelling at him because she's afraid that he's going to leave her for a younger woman. Some really weird, petty stuff. Basically, a lot of this stuff is just really shallow stuff that these characters are arguing about. And it would be fine if the rest of this run, these characters were all acting like mature adults. But the problem is, after this run, all of these insecurities that these characters have is going to continue to be the source of the A-plots throughout this run. And then stuff like, okay, Apocalypse has come and is attacking the school, that will be the B-plot, whereas the A-plots will continue to be these characters arguing with each other and acting really childish with each other. So this volume, it's not as bad as I thought it was. It had been a little while since I had read it. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's just, knowing what I am going to be getting through the rest of Peter Milligan's run, it's hard for me to forgive this for starting what Milligan started here. And really, Milligan is just kind of picking up where Austin left off. He's got the same characters. He's kind of falling into some of the same traps that Austin had. He's doing a lot of the same things that Austin did. It's just that I think a lot of people maybe tend to forgive Milligan's run, whereas they continue to hate on Austin's run, because Milligan, outside of this run, he's a pretty decent writer. He had just recently come off of X-Statix, also known as X-Force, and I know a lot of people who are really huge fans of the Rob Liefeld X-Force, they refuse to believe that there is even a Peter Milligan X-Force out there, but the Peter Milligan X-Force run, drawn by Mike Allred, is actually a pretty fantastic series. Really great stuff, with some really emotionally complex characters who, when you first start reading, you're like, oh, these characters aren't that interesting, they're kind of boring, but then you start to read, it's like, oh, there's some layers here. And then that series became X-Statix after a couple of arcs, and that was a really great series. And I think when people found out that Peter Milligan was going to be writing X-Men, they thought, oh, he's going to bring that same edge into the X-Men. And unfortunately, Milligan, it just almost feels like he ran out of steam before he even got started. It feels like he was already sick and tired of working on a mainstream X-Men book like X-Statix, and so before he even got on page 1 of the X-Men, it feels like he was already burnt out and didn't really want to be doing this, but then he did it for a few years. That's kind of what I'm feeling when I'm reading this. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe he thought that fans wanted more of the Chuck Austin stuff, but I have to think that Milligan knew better than that. I have to think that anyone would have known better than to do exactly what Chuck Austin did on his Uncanny run. But that's basically what I feel about this book. It's not the worst one in this run, if only because there's at least a reason why these characters are acting so stupid in this book, most of the time. And then sometimes Emma Frost will say, we need to bring this Golgotha creature back to the school so I can study it. And Havoc is like, this thing killed a whole bunch of people here in the South Pole. Are we really sure we want to bring it back to the school? And Wolverine says, let's have a compromise, which basically means let's do exactly what Emma said and let's ignore Havoc. And that's the one sensible thing that Havoc does in this entire book, is saying, let's kill this thing right now so that we're not bringing it back to the school in a heavily populated area. But whatever, that's one of those things where a character has to act really stupid in order for the plot to happen in the way that the writer wants the plot to happen. But I'm feeling like I'm going to hate this run a lot more as we go forward. But at least here, while this isn't as bad as what will come later, you can at least see seeds of what will come later happening here, getting its start here. The Rogue Gambit tension that is a big part of this run, it gets its start here. Also, Havoc, Polaris, and Iceman, that's a big part of the run later on. There's at least one major story where those three are kind of at each other's throats, and that kind of gets its start here. There's a lot of that you can kind of see where this run is going if you've read that run before, and then you come back and reread this. But would I recommend reading this book? No, not really. If you're one of those people who you want to read X-Men stories, but you don't want to read every X-Men story, you just want to read the really good ones, you can very easily skip Peter Milligan's run on the X-Men. This is a volume that if you found it for like $3 in a used bookstore, you could read it and you could kill off an hour or two in an afternoon if you didn't have anything else to do. And it's not the most offensive thing in the world, but it's also not going to enrich your life in any way. So those are my thoughts on X-Men Golgotha. I hope that you guys liked this review, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And over the next few weeks, I will be talking about more of Peter Milligan's X-Men run. I don't remember what the next volume is called, but I'll be doing the next volume of this run next week. So I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to check out some of my other videos that I'll be doing throughout the rest of this week. So I will see you guys then. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.